Have you ever stopped to think about, well, one of the most basic parts in your car, that little slot you put the key in or the button you push, the steering lock, the ignition switch? What if I told you that simple part is actually the core of a global market worth billions? Way bigger than you probably imagine. Okay, so let's get into this. Today we're doing a deep dive into the global automotive steering lock and ignition switch market. We're going past the basics to look at the latest forecasts, some really eye-popping revenue numbers, and what's actually driving all this growth. We're using some great data here from cognitive market research. And our mission really is to unpack the surprising scale, the money, and the global forces behind what seems like just vehicle safety tech. It shows how tiny parts tell a huge story.
It really does. And it's fascinating because, well, this market seems niche, right? But it's absolutely fundamental. These aren't just convenient bits. They're critical for safety standards, for integrating all the tech we expect in cars now. And it's not some wild fluctuating market either. The overall picture is one of remarkably steady, reliable growth. It's definitely worth digging into.
And steady's one thing, but the scale, it's just massive. Get this. The market pulled in $117.4 billion back in 2021. But wait, it gets bigger. It's projected to hit $140 billion by 2025 and then climb to an incredible $199.1 billion by 2033.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR of 4.5% over that whole period. Think about that. Almost doubling in, 12 years? For a part most of us barely notice.
It's quite something. Really puts it in perspective.
So with numbers like that, you immediately wonder, okay, where's this growth actually happening? You might think of the usual suspects in car manufacturing. But looking at the data, what's the most maybe surprising trend? Where's the real engine here?
That's a great question. And the data, well, it points very clearly towards the Asia-Pacific region. While, you might think of the traditional giants first, Asia-Pacific is just booming. The sheer volume, the rapid industrial growth, more people owning cars, it's creating this huge momentum. Just look at the figures. Started at $47.2 billion in 2021, expected to reach $57.7 billion in 2025, and then jump to $83.8 billion by 2033. That's a CAGR of 4.8%, slightly above the global average.
$83.8 billion, just in Asia Pacific.
Exactly. And it's not just new cars, remember. It's also the huge demand for replacement parts as all those vehicles get older. The aftermarket is massive there.
Okay, and within Asia Pacific, I assume China is a huge player. Its numbers look enormous, going from $15.1 billion in 2021 to $28.6 billion by 2033. That's a 5.2% CAGR. Is that just scale or something else?
It's both, really. China's domestic market is huge, of course, but they're also exporting a lot. And their big push into, new energy vehicles, EVs, that's also subtly changing the demand for these kinds of components. But China isn't the only story. Look at India, another massive growth area. It's projected to double, basically. $6.6 billion in 2021 to $13.2 billion by 2033. That's an even higher CAGR, 5.3%, driven by, a growing middle class, more car ownership.
Right.
And then you have the more established markets like Japan, South Korea, Australia. They're still growing steadily. Each of them expected to hit somewhere between, say, $8 billion and $12 billion by 2033. Solid performance.
Right.
Plus, don't forget Southeast Asia. Countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, that block is growing fast too. From $4.2 billion in 2021, aiming for $7.6 billion by 2033. That's a 5.1% CAGR. So it's a real mix across the region.
So Asia Pacific is clearly where the explosive growth is, the boom. But like you said, it's a steady market overall. So where's the bedrock? Let's shift to, say, North America. How does it fit in?
North America provides that crucial stability. Absolutely. It's a dominant, consistent contributor. It clocked in at $35.6 billion back in 2021, projected to grow to $43.7 billion by 2025, and then land around $62.1 billion by 2033. That's keeping pace with the global average, a 4.5% CAGR.
Okay, solid. And the U.S. leads there, I imagine.
Yes, the U.S. is the giant within North America, growing from $24.9 billion in 2021 to about $42.3 billion by 2033. A lot of that is driven by the huge number of cars already on the road, needing...
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
A lot of that is driven by the huge number of cars already on the road, needing replacement parts.
Makes sense.
And Canada is following a similar path, $6.5 billion up to $11.2 billion, a slightly slower 4.4% CAGR, but still very significant.
Right. But hang on, looking at the North American numbers, something jumped out at me. Mexico, it's smaller, obviously, but its growth rate is projected at 5.6%. That's higher than the U.S. or Canada, going from $4.2 billion to $8.6 billion by 2033. What's happening there? Why the faster pace?
Ah, yes. Mexico's 5.6% CAGR is definitely interesting. It stands out. It's just something more than just, general economic uptick. It really points towards a significant increase in actual automotive manufacturing in Mexico, probably driven by nearshoring trends, maybe specific investments by automakers setting up new plants there.
So becoming more of a production hub.
Exactly. More production means more demand for all the components, including these switches. It's becoming quite critical in the supply chain.
Interesting dynamic. Okay, let's hop across the Atlantic. Europe, another major traditional auto region. How does it stack up?
Europe is another major player, valued at $29.5 billion in 2021. The forecast sees it reaching $33.7 billion by 2025, and then hitting $46 billion by 2033. The growth rate is a bit more moderate, 3.9% CAGR, but still very significant volume. It's a mature, sophisticated market.
46 billion. Okay.
Yeah.
And Germany leads the way there, right?
Yeah.
$7.1 billion heading towards $12.2 billion by 2033. But I noticed the UK seems a bit slower. Its CGR is 3.2%, going from $5.3 billion to $7.4 billion. Any thoughts on that? Mature market, maybe?
Yeah, that's likely the case for the UK. A more mature market, perhaps slower growth in new car sales recently compared to some others. France is sort of in the middle. Moderate growth, $4.8 billion up to $6.9 billion. That's a 3.7% CAGR. Similar story, established market.
Right.
And then you have Italy, Russia, Spain, all showing consistent growth, each expected to cross the $4 billion mark by 2033. And one interesting detail, the rest of Europe category, so the smaller nations combined. That's projected to grow from $2.9 billion to $3.7 billion by 2033. Interestingly, the forecast shows a slight dip around 2025, but then it recovers.
Resilience even in the smaller markets.
Exactly. It highlights the overall stability, even with some fluctuations.
Okay, we've covered the giants, the boomers. What about South America? It's smaller on the global scale, but the outline mentioned consistent growth.
That's right. It's definitely a smaller piece of the pie, but its steady expansion is notable. Take Brazil. It was at $1.5 billion in 2021, set to grow to $2.7 billion by 2033. That's a strong 4.8% CAGR, actually outpacing Europe's rate.
Oh, interesting.
And Argentina shows a similar pattern, though smaller numbers, $1.1 billion moving towards $1.8 billion. Even though the individual markets are smaller, this consistent growth, especially in Brazil and Argentina, well, it signals stable demand, both for new vehicles and replacement parts.
So less speculative, more fundamental growth in car ownership.
Precisely. It points to a foundational expansion there, which is exactly what sustains this kind of component market. Smaller markets like Colombia, Peru, Chile contribute too, reaching maybe $500 million each by 2033, generally following that steady 4.5% CAGR trend.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, what are the big takeaways? We clearly see this steady, reliable growth path. You mentioned things like aftermarket demand, regional production shifts, evolving security features. How much is the technology inside these switches changing and driving value? It seems like such a basic part.
But that's a really crucial point. The function might seem basic, but the tech inside is anything but static. We're moving rapidly away from just simple mechanical locks and keys. Think about integrated immobilizers, transponder keys that talk to the car, complex anti-theft systems. And now, keyless entry, push-button starts. These all require sophisticated electronics, microcontrollers, sensors, secure communication protocols.
Right, much more complex.
Exactly, and that complexity adds value. Plus, safety and anti-theft standards are constantly evolving globally. So manufacturers have to keep upgrading these components. They aren't just passive parts anymore. They're becoming smarter, more integrated. That drives value and growth, even in mature markets.
That makes total sense. So it's not just more cars, it's also more valuable components per car driving this growth. And the regional picture seems clear. North America and Europe providing that solid, stable base driven by replacements and tech upgrades. But Asia Pacific is where the sheer momentum is with all those new vehicles hitting the road and expanding fleets.
You've got it. It really shows how even these seemingly simple, mature components tell us a lot about broader shifts. Shifts in who's buying cars, where they're being made, what safety and tech features are becoming standard. It's all reflected here.
It really is a barometer, like you said earlier. Okay, so here's something to think about as we wrap up. How might all the huge changes coming to vehicles, electrification, autonomous driving, how might that reshape even this market? I mean, if you don't need a traditional key or maybe even a traditional steering lock in the same way, What happens then? What are the new opportunities or challenges?
That's the big question, isn't it? It highlights how crucial it is to look at these granular market details. Understanding a market like this gives you real insights into where the entire industry might be headed, how consumer needs are changing. It's a fantastic reminder that sometimes the smallest, most overlooked parts are tied into massive economic shifts and technological evolution. Their future often signals much bigger changes on the horizon.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a closer look at something you might have thought was pretty much obsolete, the automotive steering lock switch.
That physical key turn, yeah.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Obsolete, the automotive steering lock switch.
That physical key turn, yeah.
Exactly. But digging into research, like from cognitive market research, the story, well, it's actually a lot more complex.
It really is more nuanced than you'd expect.
So our mission today is to unpack that. Why are they still around? I mean, here's the thing that strikes me. Cars are getting incredibly smart, right? All the screens, the connectivity. So why do these seemingly old-fashioned mechanical switches still have such a market presence? It feels a bit backwards.
Yeah, it does seem that way at first glance, but what's fascinating is that despite all the glitzy tech, the sheer volume of cars being made,
Okay.
especially in developing economies, places with huge infrastructure growth,
Yeah.
that's actually fueling demand for these basic switches.
So it's a numbers game, partly.
A big part of it. Plus, think about security. Even with fancy alarms, a solid mechanical lock is still seen as a really robust deterrent.
Like a first line of defense.
Exactly. It's low cost, it's reliable against certain kinds of, brute force theft. Manufacturers often still include it as standard for that reason. It's fundamental.
Okay, a simple physical block. Makes sense. But, alarms and tracking are so sophisticated now. Is that mechanical part really the main driver still, or is it just cheaper? And how are they changing? Are they evolving at all?
Oh, they are evolving, definitely. We're seeing this interesting trend of hybrid solutions emerging.
Hybrid. What do you mean?
Well, combining that core mechanical lock with, say, digital modules. Things like electronic immobilizers tied into keyless entry systems.
So you get both, the physical lock and the digital smarts.
Precisely. It offers that layered security, the physical strength plus the modern convenience drivers expect. It's a sort of bridge technology.
That sounds like a pretty smart compromise, actually. Bridging old and new.
It is.
But okay, let's tackle the big question. For a lot of people, putting a physical key in a new car ignition feels dated.
Yeah.
Push button start, fully keyless systems, they're everywhere now, aren't they? How much pressure is that putting on this traditional market? Is it really kind of eating away at it?
Oh, it's definitely a real pressure. You absolutely see that shift, particularly in mid-range and high-end vehicles. User experience is king there.
Right.
And there are other challenges, too. Concerns about maybe vulnerabilities in some really basic lock models, plus navigating all the different regional safety standards. It adds complexity.
So hurdles exist.
Hurdles exist, yes. But, and this is key, they persist. Why? Because they're still the go-to for entry-level cars, budget models.
The cost factor again.
Cost, absolutely. And mechanical reliability, ease of maintenance. Think about regions where maybe dealership networks aren't as dense or repair costs matter more.
So developing economies again.
Very much so. It's a bit like, you know how basic mobile phones still have a huge market in some places? Because they're tough, cheap, and they just work. It's a similar dynamic.
Okay, so not dying out, but finding their solid niche. What are the key trends then, looking ahead? How are they staying relevant?
Well, one big thing is that deeper integration we talked about. Embedding electronic immobilizer tech right into the mechanical switch unit.
Making the traditional lock smarter, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Enhancing security, but keeping that affordability. And critically, the aftermarket is really interesting here.
The replacement market?
Exactly. For those integrated steering and ignition lock units, it's seeing significant growth, especially places like Latin America, Southeast Asia, parts of Africa.
Why there specifically?
Mostly aging vehicles. Older cars on the road mean more wear and tear, more need for replacements over time. It's a steady business.
So putting this all together for you listening, it seems like these steering lock switches, far from just fading away, are actually evolving, finding new life.
Right. In specific markets, through adapting with technology, they're proving surprisingly resilient.
They really are.
And that brings up a final thought, perhaps for you to consider. How does this specific, maybe overlooked market show us that technological progress isn't always about complete replacement? Sometimes, isn't it more about adaptation, about clever hybrid approaches, and about responding to those powerful global economic forces and, well, just different consumer needs around the world?
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.